Good evening. I'm Brian Fariso, director of the museum, and it just is such a pleasure to have you come out for this conversation with Paige Powell to celebrate the ride, as well as her experiences in New York and Paige as an artist. However, before we have Paige speak and I interview her, I wanted to recognize a number of people. And, you know, it does take a village to make these exhibitions possible. We're very excited to have this show up on the third floor of the Jubit Center. That being said, I talked to the staff recently, and I think we would sort of classify this fall as a fall of exhibitions where we collaborated with artists. It was a full experience on many levels. As many of you know, we have the large exhibition by Fallen Fruit in the Schnitzer Court. We have an exhibition we collaborated with, Julia Dolan did, with Emmett Gowan. We have an exhibition, obviously, with Paige Powell. We collaborated with Kenny Sharp for the Cosmic Cavern, and we recently collaborated on the Center for Contemporary Native American Art. So all of this came together. It was an exciting preparatory month, to say the least, and artists don't always work in a straight line, so it was fun and exciting, and I think we've got a great result. And I think it reflects this idea that we're trying to make sure happens here, and sort of what I'm trying to do with the institution is making sure that we bring in the best and brightest and the most creative to make something meaningful for our community, and I think that's the result of what's happening tonight. And you know, artists always help us see the world in clarity, and I think that's what's really important. So I hope you get a better view of the world, especially after tonight's conversation. Again, before I introduce Paige, I want to say a few things to thank our donors. Cindy and Ed Miletus, these are all contributors to the ride. The Miller Meigs Foundation, Jeff and Karen Wallace Bartlett, Jordan Schnitzer, Bartell, Jordan Schnitzer, Thomas Lauderdale, Pink Martini, Kathleen Lewis, and Studio J, Janet and John J, and Janet's here with us this evening, Kei Horiuchi, Henry Jennings, and Lucy Rockwell are also part of the Studio J studio. And then Cosmic Cavern, which is a complimentary show. We had a number of people support that as well, and I'm very grateful to the Ed Cadero Fund of OCF, as well as Jeannie Coleman, Frank Extenax, Henry Hillman and his foundation, Susan Hoffman, Thomas Lauderdale again, Paula Madden, and Al Solheim. So a big round of applause for their support and donations. And then here on the team, I'd like to say a special thanks to Julia Dolan, the Minor White Curator of Photography, Sarah Krajewski, our Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art, Betsy Conup, who's in our education department, but she also works with Paige, as well as Rose Dixon, who works with Paige at the archives. A big round of applause for them, please. I'm happy to say that due to overwhelming success and audience response, this exhibition will be extended to April 6th. So we have some time. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Paige Powell. And this is perhaps one of the best introductions I've ever given. You will know not only because Paige is a really wonderful person to work with, but also you'll understand as I go through this introduction why it's so special. Paige Powell is one of the most respected figures in the international art and publishing world. As associate publisher of Interview magazine through the 1990s, and also one of Andy Warhol's best friends and confidants, especially during the last 7 years of his life, she was instrumental in the careers of countless artists such as Jean-Michel Basquiat, Julian Galen, as well as Stephen Sprouse. Going to New York with Paige is like going to the Vatican with the Virgin Mary, says her friend Thomas Lauderdale. Everyone loves her. Paige grew up on the in Southwest Portland. She is the daughter of the founding partner of a successful insurance company. A fifth-generation Oregonian, her ancestors traveled by covered wagon to Portland in 1846, splitting off from the Donner Party in Idaho. A childhood of the outdoors, surrounded by a menagerie of pets and rescued birds, she showed great promise in art and attended summer art classes at the Children's Art Museum, headed by Mary Alice Gardner. Later, after graduating from Beaverton High School and the University of Oregon with a degree in English, she studied at the Aegean School of Fine Arts in Paros, Greece, and at the Arts Students League in New York City. She began taking photographs at the very young age of 17. After a brief stint at the fledgling sportswear company called Blue Ribbon Sports, now known as Nike, she started volunteering and later became the public affairs director for the Portland Zoo. There, she tended orphaned and injured animals in the nursery, taught chimpanzees American Sign Language, successfully campaigned for zoo tax levies, and marketed truckloads of elephant dung as garden fertilizer in cans known as Zoo Dew. She also co-founded the Cascade Runoff. She's one of the co-founders of Cascade Runoff. A social activist and lobbyist for the ACLU in 1976, Paige challenged the Multnomah Athletic Club, demanding that women be given full voting membership, a fight I'm very happy because my wife can join me there now, along with people like Sid Lazak, Brian Booth, Ann Webb, and Natalie Jewett. They won the fight 2 years later. In December 1980, 5 days after John Lennon was shot, Powell moved to New York City and became one of Andy Warhol's best friends and was his right-hand person at Interview magazine. Warhol reportedly said to her, "If you can sell elephant poop, you can certainly sell advertising." Nearly every day for the next 7 years of Andy's life, they worked, lunched, shopped, socialized, dined, and went out at night for dinner. They volunteered in soup kitchens, attended the ballet, went to parties and nightclubs, and usually spoke on the telephone right before bedtime. Up until Andy's death in 1987, Paige was one of those who organized Andy's social calendar. She worked closely with Warhol on commissioned art projects and ran the magazine's advertising program, marketing, media, and public relation departments. She was instrumental in the Absolute Vodka campaign, pairing artists with advertising. Warhol once wrote in his diaries when referencing the editors of Interview magazine that they're all dispensable except Paige. I really like Paige. Throughout her career, Paige has been a champion of artists and musicians. Paige was responsible for Jean-Michel Basquiat's career, said Chris Murray once of Govinda Gallery in Washington, D.C., in a 2013 interview in the Portland Tribune newspaper. Struck by Jean-Michel's earnestness and eccentricity, she arranged a show at her Upper East Side apartment, pricing Basquiat's paintings from $2,000 to $8,000. Paige helped forge a relationship between Andy Warhol and Jean-Michel Basquiat. Jean-Michel Basquiat's father once said, "Gerard, Paige was the one. She was always there, and she was the only person who did not take advantage of Jean-Michel financially." In 1981, Paige began documenting the lives of people around her. As a result, she was one of the most intimate and significant photo documentations, has one of the most intimate photo documentation of Andy Warhol's last 7 years, as well as arguably one of the best collections of photo documentation of New York from 1981 to 1984. She continues to take photographs which chronicle the ongoing careers of her friends in the art world, including Kenny Scharf, Gus Van Sant, Vincent Gallo, and Ruben and Isabel Toledo. Many of Paige's photographs were published in Interview magazine. Others were published in Brutus, a Japanese art, architecture, fashion magazine for men, for which Paige was the New York editor. Paige has also had a one-person exhibition of her 800 early images, wallpapering an entire room along with handwritten documentation at Balula Land Bar in New York City, and this took place in January of 1984. At Balula Land, people tore photographs off the wall and took them home. New photographs took their place, and the cycle of tearing off and replacing continued for weeks. In 1994, Paige returned to Oregon to be near her parents and to continue her activist work on behalf of animals. She founded ARC Online, which serves as a clearinghouse for information about animal rights activism. She founded the Pearl Arts Foundation District, which brought public art projects such as Kenny Scharf's totems in Jameson Park and the William Wegman Dog Bowl in the North Park blocks. She curated and selected over 400 pieces of Oregon-based art for the Nines Hotel. 4 years ago, her friend Thomas Lauderdale urged her to begin archiving her photographs and videos. 40 boxes of prints, contact sheets, negatives, Polaroids, videos were uncatalogued in very much disarray. Since then, a team of archivists, headed by Betsy Conop, Rose Dixon, and Blair Saxon Hill, have been archiving her collection. In February 2014, Paige had her first solo exhibition, Reclining Nude, Jean-Michel Basquiat, at the Suzanne Guez Gallery in New York City. Earlier this month, she opened her first museum exhibition here at the Portland Art Museum. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Paige Powell. So now let's take a journey through New York and let's figure out how this story emerges. And I wanted to start with this image here of the archives. And I love this photograph because it's the archives in what we call disarray. And I wanted to ask Paige a little bit about what her thinking was when she was taking these photographs. Did she imagine that they would come together in this exhibition? And what was the journey like of pulling together the archives?
Well, I didn't have any plans for them. And they basically, after I took videos, I just threw them into boxes. The videos I finally saw about 1.5 years ago after they were transferred, and Rose Dixon, one of the archivists, edited them, and that was the first time I saw them. And with the photographs, a lot of those photographs were in, well, a percentage in Interview Magazine and Brutus Magazine, and then some in art, catalogs and books.
So before they were pulled together at Thomas's loft, and you've pulled together this archive, where were they?
They were in storage in various places. First, they were, when I moved out of New York, Brownstone moving in storage. Then I moved down to the coast. They were in storage there. And then in the house where I am, they were in the garage, under the beds, closets, bureaus. They were hidden, sort of.
And Paige, did you see these as works of art or documentation or both? How did you view the archives and the images that you took?
Documentation. But they were too much in disarray to even try to make any sense out of it. And I just thought, well, whoever ends up with whatever I have at the end of my life, they can deal with it. Or perhaps there'll be a father's fire or something.
So I think one of the great stories is your relationship with Thomas and pulling this together. Talk a little bit about that relationship. How did it start, and how did you two come to the conclusion that perhaps you should pull this work together, catalog it, document it?
Thomas came over to the house. I met Thomas through a little sing-along. Well, actually, it was just a little performance with Gus Van Sant, and I went with Gus to it, and I met Thomas, and I think that was around 1998, 99. And we became friends, and Thomas would come over, and he'd see stacks of photographs here and there, and he started trying to make sense out of them because he's an amazing historian, and he likes to have everything in order, even if it's not his. So he came over and started, then he realized there were so many of them, and he finally said, we have to do something about this. And Dr. Frances Turpak from the Getty Museum came up, and she was so overwhelmed. She spent 2 days going through whatever we could find. I mean, it was just probably like 1% of what I had or less. And she thought that I should, archive him. Thomas came over with his pink martini van, which has now been customized by Kenny Scharf. It was cars bombed, I think, a week ago. And at the time, he just loaded everything up and took everything to his studio, his loft on First Avenue, and set up a whole archive area. And then he brought in 12, 15 archivists, library scientists to go through and start looking for these photos that he thought would be important to show. and they were the reclining nude Jean-Michel Basquiat negatives.
Well, Thomas, thank you for that, and thank you for helping bring this together. And Julia Dola and I were fortunate to go over to the loft this summer and we were shown some of the photographs, and it's truly amazing what is in these archives, and I think you've only seen a very small portion of it, so we're excited to show more of it in the future and as well as tonight. I think this journey from Oregon, a fifth-generation Oregonian traveling to New York, becoming at the center of the art world, which perhaps you didn't know was the center of the art world at that time. But as we look back today, over 30 years ago, the 1980s and what you were involved with, Paige, was really quite important historically, artistically, and has shaped what we think about the art world today. So I want to step back a little bit and talk about your journey to New York and what you experienced, and sort of try to understand what you were thinking and what you were seeing. So here's an image of a lot of individuals, and it's great. Every time I talk to you, you tell us who they are. So why don't you take us through some of the people in this image?
Well, there's Grandmaster Flash down below, and that was at a party, and above that at the Roxy, that was really early 81, 82. The Roxy was a club where it was a dance club, and there'd be these breakouts all over the dance floor of break dancers, and that's one of the break dancers. The photograph above that was a Headbangers Club. Stephen Sprouse liked that club a lot, and they would hurtle bodies off the stage, and people would catch them. The one, Fresh 14, was on Union Square. It didn't last very long. Madonna performed there. And there was like a shootout in that. And then the one below it was at La Famille. That was in Harlem. And the bottom one is Constance, a famous drag queen that performed a lot at the Pyramid Club. And I think that was at I Spy. So different nightclubs.
So you woke up one morning in Oregon and said, I'm going to New York.
Well, it wasn't exactly like that. I was working for Blue Ribbon Sports, so they sent me to
Okay.
New York a couple times, and I literally spent, I think, 5 days without sleeping. I thought, this is where I belong. So it took a long time to actually go there.
Was it a hard decision for you? Was it a difficult move?
Well, I was very settled in Portland with my friends, my family. I had a job, so it took a while to get up the nerve to do it.
So when you got to New York, the art world was emerging. There was a new generation of artists coming along. I think for those of us who have studied this history and have lived this, it was that grittiness of New York, this texture, the social interactions, the interaction between the graffiti artists, the music, the visual artists, the institutions, the music clubs, the dance clubs, all coming together to create something unique. And I wanted to have Paige talk a little bit about the people she met and her observations at this time. So we'll start with this image in particular. Why don't you talk a little bit about who that is and what this represents?
That's Henry Getzeller. He was the city commissioner for cultural affairs. He was also at the Metropolitan Museum as an art curator. Very eccentric. His specialty was really conceptual, contemporary art, although he was very knowledgeable, like in modernism. And he would drive around in a really beat up old, like a wagon, a station wagon, and he would hire these young kids to drive him around, and he'd show up in front of an art gallery, let's say Tony Schifrazi Gallery, and there'd be just tons of people out in front, and they would just like make way for Henry. And this particular photograph was taken at the Con Edison building that was at 32nd and Madison that Andy bought in 1983. It's in the dining room. And then the photograph, that's Andy, it was like a boat party going around the East River.
So this is a perfect moment to pause. How did you meet Andy, and how did you end up at Interview Magazine?
When I went to New York, I knew I had to do one of two jobs, otherwise it just wasn't worth my move. And I wanted something very indigenous, so I loved Interview Magazine. And actually the first issue of Interview Magazine I saw at my friend's house, Helen. Where's Helen? Okay, there she is, over there. And I thought this magazine is so fantastic that I would like to go and work at this magazine. And Andy's name was on the cover of the magazine, but I just assumed he just had his name on the cover. I didn't realize he was so involved. And the other was working for Woody Allen. And after going back and forth and knocking on doors and serendipitously getting some interviews, I actually ended up with both jobs. And the first one was starting with interview. It was in February of '81. The other one would have started in as an assistant in production for Woody Allen in May. He was working on the play The Floating Light Bulb at the time, so he was taking a break from filmmaking. And I thought if it didn't work out with the interview, I could probably go back and get the other job.
Absolutely.
So that's how I got it.
So what were your first impressions of Andy Warhol?
Well, when I went for interviews, first of all, there wasn't even a job offer when I was there. I just was very lucky that Ronnie Catrone, Andy's technical assistant, let me in this bulletproof door. He had been shot in 1969, and he was very paranoid. In fact, I would go with them when we would go shopping for glasses, eyeglasses, and they were always bulletproof glasses. He just said to me, you know, if I lose my eyes, I can't work. But if I lose my body and I have my eyes, I can continue working. That's why he did that.
Great quote. And then, of course, Jean-Michel Basquiat. And just as a side note, we have some great paintings on display right now at the museum. We're very fortunate. Dane Nelson has lent us some. Jordan Schnitzer has also lent us some material. So please make sure you take time on the bottom floor of the Jubit Center in the Link Gallery to look at some of these great works. So Jean-Michel, how did you meet him?
I met him through my ex-boyfriend, who was Andy's technical assistant, Jay Shriver. And it started because I was going up to the South Bronx. There was an art space up there run by Stephen Ines. He was Austrian, and his background was in science. He was a physicist, get a master's in physics, as well as art history. And he opened up this warehouse to have artists that combine science with art. And I saw these amazing paintings. Most of them were street artists that painted on train doors and just found wood, and most of them were from the South Bronx. And there was so much excitement with that, with the artwork, that I tried to get friends to go up there, and they didn't want to go up. It was considered a very scary place to go. And so the people that owned the apartment where I was living, I asked if I could do an exhibition there, and they said yes, so that people could come and see the works. And then I wanted to include Jean-Michel, although Jean-Michel was from a nice family over in Brooklyn, but he wanted to be part of that world. And so I went to his loft on Crosby Street in Soho with Jay, and then asked him. He immediately said he wanted to be in the show. So I met him.
You know, and I think if you spend time with Jean-Michel's work today, he's highly celebrated, as I think many of us know. And it's not just about the graffiti art. It's really about him moving beyond, transcending. He's a poet. He was incredibly intellectually engaged. He was very well read, wasn't he? I mean, he really was a sort of a protege intellectually. And I think his artwork, if you spend time with it, you can see these various rhythms and patterns visually, but also with the letters. So it's an artist who is worthy of all the attention he's getting today and then some. And that was really forward thinking of you to see that talent. Did you have any idea of what he would become when you spent time with him?
No, I mean, at the time, I just thought that's the way New York was all the time. I mean, I had no reference before, so I just
Sure.
thought this is the way it is. And most of everyone I knew, the younger generation, at the time, people just did what they wanted to do, to be creative. There's no ceiling on it at all. It wasn't about the way the art market is there today. Trying to get gallery shows and having really expensive artworks and trying to chase the buyer, basically, a lot of them. There wasn't that sort of, people just made works they wanted to make the work.
Yeah, I mean, he's so pure in his production. And then, of course, Keith Haring, another major figure from this moment, someone who, again, brings graffiti, but also tackles important social issues. And you took this picture, yes?
Yes, and also I did a video of him. It's a rare video. I was the only one to be there when he was painting Andy Warhol's white papier-mâché elephant at Andy's studio. And that's part of the ride. That's one of the videos in the ride. And he was amazing. I mean, the way he painted that without dropping any paint, without scrunching up any areas over the surface that was all dented. It was all papier-mâché. It was pretty phenomenal. And Keith and Kenny went to School of Visual Arts. Kenny told me that he didn't get into any other art school. He applied at all these different art colleges, and he didn't get in, but at School of Visual Arts, and they were roommates too, Keith and Kenny. And then Jean-Michel would pop in just to sit in on classes. He never actually was enrolled there.
And Kenny Scharf was here last week or 2 weeks ago doing his installation. He's perhaps one of the nicest artists I've ever met. He's really a great person to work with. He's always like that? I mean, that's his personality?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we have the Cosmic Cavern right next to the ride. Please go see that. And then there's Francesco Clemente here. And he was part of Andy's group as well.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
An important artist from Naples, Italy, and really someone who was beloved and is continued to be beloved in the contemporary art world. Describe him a little bit. Tell us a little bit about his personality and what you saw in his art.
Well, Francesco, there were three, they were called the 3 Cs. Enzo Cucci and Sandra Chia and Francesco Clemente. They all came up at the same time in Italy, and they pretty much, Enzo Cucci stayed in Rome, but Sandra Chia and Francesco, they came over with their families and lived in New York. Very poetic. He's quite scholarly, Francesco. And his wife, Alba Clemente, who will be in this photograph with the artist Quan Chi, is a great artist too. And they're just like a wonderful family in New York.
So this photograph, where Alba is there on the left, I was asking Paige because this period in time in New York is so legendary, not only for artistic production, but for also tragedy. I mean, it was a difficult time. And I was asking Paige what that was like and what she saw. And I say tragedy because of the AIDS epidemic, drug overdoses. We lost Jean-Michel at a very young age. And I think you mentioned to me 3 of the people in this picture of 4 are all gone.
3 of them, Keith Haring, Quan Chi, and Tina Chow, they all died of AIDS before 1990.
A real tragedy. And I think in many ways that texture, that tension that was happening in that creativity has its pluses and minuses, and I think it's reflected in this moment in the art. And the art market was really taking off as well. And in this picture in particular, I'm going to show a few pictures, but the next one I'll talk a little bit about more, and Paige will, but describe the people in this image.
Richard Wiseman, he is the son of Marcia and Frederick Wiseman, and his uncle is Norton Simon. Richard grew up with art collectors, and Marcia, his mother, was the main founder of MoCA in LA, Museum of Contemporary Art. So Richard started collecting when he was very young. Next to him was a superstar model. That was Cheryl Tiegs. that he was dating, and Andy, and I don't know the lady on the far left. I think that was at the Plaza Hotel. It was a party at the Plaza Hotel.
So this was a very famous New York Times magazine cover from 1985. I actually remember this as a kid. You took this photo, and is that Andy opening it, looking at the images?
No, I think that's Janine, Jean-Michel's sister. This was in Brooklyn at Andy Warhol's it was Jean-Michel's family home in Brooklyn. And Gerard, Jean-Michel's father, wanted to have a little dinner for him. So Andy and I went, and one or two of the neighbors.
So talk a little bit about the celebrity that happened to Jean-Michel. How did it affect him? Because all of a sudden, here is a young artist who's launched into the front page of the New York Times Magazine, and his work starts to sell for many, many zeros. How did that affect him? What was happening at that time?
Well, Jean-Michel loved it, and and also really hated it at the same time. I mean, he loved to run around with a cigar box of dollar bills, and he was very generous, very impulsive. But I think it was scary, frightening for him. Like if he bought something that was expensive, sometimes he would just break down into tears. It was just too much for him. So it was hard.
And this was happening with the other artists as well. I mean, Andy was already an established artist, and Keith at this time was also at the highest level or at a high level.
Yes, Keith was, Kenny, Francesco, they were all, at the high level.
Yeah. So part of this project is to peel back the layers of not only this time in the 80s, but I wanted to, we noticed a specific vision, I mean, Julia and I and Sarah, when we were putting this together with Paige, of her artistic vision, her view of the world. She made very deliberate decisions, although she may not have known it at the time, of the images she took. So I wanted to talk a little bit about her process as an artist and how she came to what we have today as the Ride, and sort of thinking about her future in developing works of art based on these experiences. And I think this image is a good start because, again, I think with Andy Warhol and Interview Magazine in particular, art and consumerism, the lines are blurred continually. So in many ways, I think your artistic career started or was fermented here.
Yes, I was not really realizing I was right at the center of a whole, it was like an epic period of time that I came to know decades later. So this was at Astor Barbershop. Everything was the high and the low with us at Interview Magazine, Andy's studio. It was like a family. And so we all kind of had the same haircut. This was $6.50 for this haircut at Astor Barbershop. So that was sort of the androgynous look. But then the high was going to Guerin at the Plaza Hotel for like $250 for the same haircut. So it's like the high and the low. We had only cold running water in our Andy's studio in the bathroom, and yet we had limousine service, charge accounts at like Le Cirque and other restaurants. So it was just a high and low going on. This particular studio near Astor Place that Andy had at 860 Broadway was right off Union Square. There were shootouts going on there. There were gun fights and all kinds of stuff going on at the time.
So these are some images of your time up. You spent time up in Harlem. We can see a Jean-Michel painting in the background. In one of the images, we see breakdancing. So you were taking time going up to Harlem at that time as well, or?
Yes, I was in Harlem. From what I understand from many curators, that I have the best documentation of Harlem in the 80s. No one was going up there. In the 60s, there were fires going on up there. There's a lot of violence. The 70s, New York was bankrupt. It's a lot of, I'll never forget when John F. Kennedy Jr. had his bike. He was pushed off his bike in the middle of the day in Central Park. That was in the 70s. Mayor Lindsay was he was the mayor. And so the 80s, no one was interested in going up there at all. Everything was going downtown, Tribeca, Soho, East Village. But it reminded me, I lived on the Upper West Side, and then eventually I bought a co-op on the Upper East Side. But it was actually less distance to go to Harlem than to go all the way downtown. I did both. I went uptown and downtown, but it reminded me of Portland because it was very friendly, very neighborly-like in Harlem. It's very down to earth.
So obviously you were not scared.
No, I never felt afraid at all up there. They really took care of you once you went in a club or a restaurant, and yeah.
Sure. Well, I grew up in New Jersey, and I remember everyone said, go to Manhattan, but don't go to Harlem. Never go to Harlem. So it's great to see that you ventured up there. And it is this creative burgeoning that was happening at that time and continues to this day, and even more so with the Studio Museum. This was an important job that you had, that you took on. Talk a little bit about your experiences with Brutus.
Well, I was going out to LA a lot with Interview magazine. So that was in 1981, and I met Timothy Street Porter. Timothy Street Porter, you might know who he is. He is an architectural photographer. He's published many books. He's an incredible photographer. And so I met him and Annie, his wife, in LA. And then they came to New York one time. I was having dinner with them at the Odeon, and Kyuichi Tsuzuzi was working with him on a project for Brutus. Brutus was the kind of the ultimate Japanese pop culture, more male magazine with art, focusing on art, architecture, and fashion. And so Timothy said, well, Paige, he goes out, to all these clubs at night. And Kyoichi said, oh, do you think you could maybe do a story for us on nightclubs? And I said, well, that's boring. I would do a story on the after-hour clubs that open at 4 a.m. And he goes, you're kidding. I go, no. He goes, you're hired. So that's how I started. And I continued working with them for about, at least 7 or 8 years as a photojournalist.
Does Brutus still exist today?
No, I don't think it does, but some of their other magazines. It was owned by Hebron Publishing that went to Magazine House, but they have Popeye and Gulliver. I think those are two of the magazines. But it might. I'm just not really sure.
Yeah. And this is some of the work you did at Interview early on.
Yes, it was a 6-page spread on Harlem, and actually it was Andy's idea that this go into Interview magazine. He knew I was going up there all the time. He saw some of my photos. He said, you really need to do something. And he helped me with the captions. He goes, every single person in these photographs needs to be important. So, all these are mainly like clubs, restaurants. Percy Sutton, he was the godfather of Harlem. He's the second photo to the top, the glasses on the mustache. Latasha at the bottom, she was the winner of the Apollo Theater Amateur Night. I became very close friends with the Coopers. Ralph Cooper Sr. started Amateur Night and discovered Ella Fitzgerald. And his son, Ralph Cooper Jr., just continued on with the Amateur Nights. And is there Mr. Sandman there? Maybe he's in another photograph. But there he is. He's at the bottom. So on Amateur Night, if you were bad, the audience would boo, and Mr. Sandman would come on and take a cane and do a tap dance. He was like this world-class tap dancer, and would tap dance them off the stage.
And that's the gentleman with the hat in the lower left. Yeah. And here's your studio in New York. Obviously, some paintings of Jean-Michel's, and there's some important work. Why don't you point out in the lower left in particular, sort of a masterpiece on the right-hand wall there.
Yeah, that's the Mitchell Crow. I think that's the most seminal piece that Jean-Michel ever made in his life. It's a triptych. It's really large. I don't know if you can see the length of it. It's a very, very large triptych. And the Mitchell Crew was a housing project. It was up near Stephen Ines's place and his art studio. And Jean-Michel wanted to be included with that group of artists. But those artists, they came from the project. And Ramel Z was really angry at Jean-Michel for doing the Mitchell Crew because he felt like Jean-Michel was lifting from their lives up there, that that he came from this nice middle-class family from Brooklyn. But it's really beautiful. It's a really beautiful piece, and it pays tribute to all the artists and the kids that come out of these projects. That it's a lot of them, join gangs and die young, so it's important.
So here's an image of your installation or exhibition that you did in 2014 at Suzanne Guez Gallery, New York. You started to look at your archives in a different way, think about them, think about the photos. How was this received, and what was your thinking behind it? What did you want to show?
First of all, Thomas Lauderdale had the vision for me to show them. And he found like a part of a contact sheet that was torn off, but no negatives. And he said, these are really strong photographs. I mean, they're really strong. Here's this artist, and you're just seeing him without posing. He's not posing, and he's just, there's no sexual gaze. It shows the artist like what he works with. He watches TV, he likes cartoons. He smokes joints of cigarettes, and there's drawings on the floor. There's a lot of drawing. There's the New York Times, a stack of records, Black Ruhu, and then his painting in the background. So he's just kind of chilling out. And I wasn't really sure that I wanted to show them. And after about 2 weeks, I thought, okay, I feel confident to show him, because I thought, well, what would Jean-Michel think of these photographs? And Jean-Michel, I knew, would love them. He was very proud of his body. He had no body issues. He had been photographed nude before, and he looked really great, and particularly like 30 years later. So I knew he would like them. And then I thought, well, what would Andy Warhol think of these? And then all I could think of is Andy would be really jealous that he didn't take them himself. So I thought, okay, I can do this, yeah.
And there was good critical attention. It was a very well-received show. And then we get to Beulah Land, which is now installed at our museum. And I think as we went through that visual timeline and that journey, you can see a lot of Paige's work coming together in this piece. So this is upstairs, and talk a little bit about this a little bit more in depth and how it came together.
Okay, so Beulah Land was a club. It was an art bar in the East Village on Avenue A and 10th Street. And Susan Hannaford Rose, I think you'll see a picture of her coming up pretty soon. Susan Hannaford Rose was the manager there, and she knew I was doing photography, so she asked if I would do some photography, do something in the art bar, and also with my two friends, Jennifer Chapman and Benjamin Liu. Benjamin Liu was Andy's drag queen by night and bodyguard by day. And so we did this exhibition. She gave me a room, and it didn't have nice lighting like this. I used a flashlight to show people when I went there at night. It was very poor lighting.
Here's an original,
yeah,
right?
And that's Susan Hannaford Rose over on the right there. Susan Hannaford Rose lives in West Berlin now. So that's how it came about. And the idea was, like, what was I going to show? I just wanted to show where I was, and just a very chaotic life. It was filled night and day with very little sleep. I would go maybe 2 months, and then I would get sick for 2 days. I would just be exhausted, just night and day, just going out all the time. And that was part of my job, too. I had to go to clubs and, film reviews and museum openings and gallery openings. So.
But I know I'm stating the obvious, but obviously this is the precursor to Facebook, Instagram, among many other things to this day, and it's really fascinating to see it emerge then. This is your apartment, yes? So
that's where I was living.
Okay.
And so that was just trying to put it together, like, that was the chaos, and the chaos was going to go up on the wall down at Beulah Land. And what people would do is, you can see, okay, that's at Beulah Land, that's the original Beulah Land. And Lee Jaffe is on the left. I met him through Jean-Michel. He was with Bob Marley and the Wailers in the late 60s, early 70s. He played the harmonica and the guitar, and he's also a photographer, artist. He lives in Los Angeles now. But people would just kind of rip the photographs off the wall, and then I always carried a Polaroid, usually some kind of a camera, and I would take pictures of people in the bar or out on the street, and I would just put them back up on the wall with some glue or Scotch tape. People would leave notes sometimes with a stick pin, tack, and so it was very interactive. And that's why this show's interactive too, to carry on the tradition.
And then this is a great photo because, again, obviously the technology is different, but talk a little bit about this.
So working for Brutus Magazine was great. They would, Kyoichi would always bring me over the latest camera, the latest video cameras as well. And in New York, at the time, it didn't quickly come here. It was about a 6-month delay. So it was really fun having the latest, products. And Andy, the camcorder that Andy's holding was actually mine. Andy was starting to get interested at the end of his life to start doing films again. He really wanted to make it as a film. He wanted to make it as a commercial filmmaker. He wanted to be acknowledged in Hollywood as a filmmaker.
So I'll do a little pitch here. Next fall, we're premiering a major exhibition of Andy's work. Thanks to Jordan Schnitzer, he has over 400 pieces in his collection. We'll be showing that. We're originating the show. Sarah Krajewski's helping me organize this, so stay tuned. We'll have a lot more experience with Andy, but also we're trying to show some of his films, so that'll be fun. The ride emerged again, and you integrated video within photos. And I think there's a great story because the photo here is the original, is that correct?
Yes, and that's Sean Connery in jail. It's Goldfinger he's watching.
And then you decided to place video within the image.
Well, so the 3 photographs, they're just 3 photographs that I took. It was in Skull Limousine. Jonathan Skull's parents were major art collectors, and they had limousine companies. And so Jonathan decided to start kind of a limousine service for younger people, like artists. And so it's in one of his limos. And so, Jean-Michel's completely decked out. He's smoking a pipe. And we're on our way over to his family's house in Brooklyn. So when I saw the photographs, the first image is fairly clear. You can see Sean Connery in jail, but the other 2 are very static. And I thought it'd be really great to collaborate. I had a wild dream to maybe Ryan Trecarton, one of my favorite video artists, maybe he might want to collaborate with me, or Micheline Thomas. And then I thought, well, they're so famous, they wouldn't want to bother with me. And then after Rose Dixon showed me the edited film that she pulled out, I thought, wow, I think we could put this in the monitor. I mean, in the TV monitor. And but I knew that it had to be really important because Jean-Michel was either very focused or not focused at all. There was nothing in between. And I knew he'd be keenly interested. And a video of Andy talking to me about why he's not going to the party he's hosting that evening, in the first one with a lot of banter, and the second one of Keith Haring painting the elephant, and the third one Andy shopping at flea markets, antique stores, and then a second video of a party at Keith Haring's house. So I knew he would really want to be watching. All 3 of those photographs are pretty identical. The only difference is it's almost like a 3-page flip book, because he just leans in closer and closer. The third one, he's right up next to the screen, and just slight differentiation.
Did he often smoke a pipe?
He smoked a lot of stuff. He did. So no, he didn't smoke a pipe that much.
So we've had great success with this exhibition, not only because it's compelling and it pulls back the curtain on this important time, but obviously it's been a great backdrop for selfies, as you can see, and will continue. We wanted to open up the floor for questions, and I just wanted to say that it's been a real honor to work with Paige. She's one of the nicest people I've gotten to know here in Oregon, and she's just a sweetheart. Paige, thank you so much for working with us.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you.
So we'll open up the floor for questions if there are any. And Betsy has a microphone.
Paige, during your years in New York, I wondered if you also were focusing on any of your animal rights activities. I know you were very busy in the art world, but with animals being so important to you, I wondered how that expressed itself and if you, in turn, influenced any of the artists that you were with to think more about animal rights.
Yes, I was. Particularly after AIDS became identified that the whole AIDS epidemic and people who had pets and they couldn't walk them and trying to keep them so they could stay in their home. I worked with several organizations to, I had some benefits that I arranged, and through Interview Magazine too, I arranged them. So we also met Suda, different clothing lines. We would do events to raise money and awareness for people who had pets with AIDS and get volunteers to go in and walk the animals and help with the veterinary bills. And then I started a TV show, it's a cable access show called It's a Dog's Life, Cats Too, and Sometimes Birds. And it was with my friend, the novelist Tama Janowitz. And we modeled it after Albert Maysles' Grey Gardens and QVC. QVC had just come out, and Tama was the on-air hostess, and I was the I was the filmmaker and editor and producer of it. So we did this show, and we would focus on different people that were helping with animals, and we would have the phone number and the name of the organization on the screen after we profiled individually each dog or cat. Or in the case of birds, we had this eccentric man who lived on East 78th Street, and he had like several thousand birds, like mainly pigeons and seagulls, that he would take care of and then release them. He lived in a 5-story, beautiful townhouse, and he would bring in docents from Park Avenue to help volunteer. And one of the docents who was on the 3rd floor said, "This used to be a beautiful dining room, but look at it now, it's the infirmary." So I helped out with my friend Tama to do this TV show, which is very successful. We actually won Best Manhattan Cable Access, Long Island Cable Access Show, public TV on cable access in 1992. And we were parodied on Saturday Night Live with Chevy Chase. That's the best part. So people were aware of it. Tama was in a deli at 3 or 4 in the morning near her house. This man came up to her and said, "Hey, I just saw you on TV." And they would run. I made friends with the woman who put in the videos at this funky little place on East 22nd Street. And she would just drop them in anytime somebody sent in a video that didn't have the countdown. And so it ran frequently. We did an episode like every 6 weeks.
Do you mind passing that down? Thanks.
Hi, Paige. You've got a huge body of work, and I know that you've got some of it on display right now. What are the plans for the rest of the work?
Well, it's because we haven't finished archiving. We're quite a ways out. We have I think a little over a decade, Betsy can, that we haven't even touched yet. So we have quite a bit to do. But for example, with Harlem, I really want to do a museum show. I met with Sean Corcoran last year. He's one of the curators at City Museum of New York, and he's very, very interested in doing an exhibition. There's also Studio Museum, and Thelma Golden. I can't show there. It's black only that can show there. So Afro-American black. And which I respect. And but I'm really hoping to do, I want to do it, I would like to really do that as a big major project. Also, like a series of double exposures, triple exposures, just breaking it down into artist eating, a book on artist eating. I can break it down to different artists, animals. I mean, just it's Betsy and Rose, who's here tonight, can attest that we just keep coming up with ideas as we see things, as we go along.
And one other question. You had mentioned that Andy might be jealous of your photos of Jean-Michel. Did you ever have situations where Andy perceived you as competition, or was there any conflict in that relationship?
Yes, he did. We had a blind date club, and he, this is, okay, well, I'll try to make this quick. So this friend of mine in Los Angeles who's a filmmaker, I didn't have a boyfriend at the time, and she said, oh, I've got this really great guy I want you to meet, and he's coming to New York, and he's a producer out here. And so he called, and he wanted to know where I wanted to go, and we always went to Odeon. So I said, oh, Odeon. And so I was going to meet him there. And then a couple hours before I left the office to go to dinner, Jeffrey Slonim, who was our arts editor, Tama Janowitz's cousin, came up to me and said that Tama broke up with her boyfriend. She was really sad. He didn't know what to do about it. And I said, well, hey, I've got a blind date tonight. Maybe she could join us. So she said yes, she wanted to go. And then then Andy came by my office, and he said, what are you doing tonight? And I said, well, I've got a blind date, Andy. And he goes, really, where is it? And I said, well, it's at the Odeon. He goes, well, I'd like to go. And I go, okay, all right, yeah, you can come. So in the end, then Andy brought 3 or 4 guys with him. So this poor guy comes in, and he's got this open shirt with, he's like a Hawaiian shirt, and he's got all this gold hanging off of him. And there's Tam and I, we have the seat between us, and then Andy has 5 guys, and then anyways, we had so much fun that Andy said, okay, we have to do a blind date club. So the blind date club was actually Tama, Andy, and myself, and we had to get each other a date. So every time Andy would get me a date, he would go after the date. He would go after the date, and it was like, I could say, Andy, you can't do that. So, yeah. And then also with Jean-Michel, he kind of snagged him away.
Well, thank you very, very much. Thank you for supporting the museum, and thank you for being here. Thanks again, Paige.
Can I say one more thing? One more thing. I just want to give a shout out to my very good friends, Kim Hastrider and Drew Elliott. Kim is the original founder and the editor-in-chief of Paper Magazine in New York. It's this fantastic pop culture magazine. Drew's the global creative director. And they came out here from New York just to see the show. And they're like really amazing. And I told Kim, I said, if Andy was alive today and had to pass the baton to any magazine out there, he would pass it to Paper. It's really community of New York, LA. They have really young kids out there just scouring. They just know they're part of the mix. And they just bring everything really fresh.